My sister-in-law smiled at me the entire night she tried to ruin my life. That's the part I keep coming back to, not the humiliation, not the way the table went quiet. The smile, wide and warm and completely deliberate. My husband's family has a tradition. Every year on the weekend closest to his parents' anniversary, they rent out the back room at Hargrove's, this old steakhouse in the kind of town where everyone knows your car. White tablecloths, real candles, the kind of dinner where you dress up and pretend everything is fine even when it absolutely isn't. I had been married into this family for 3 years by then. 3 years of learning which topics to avoid at the table, which stories to laugh at even when they weren't funny, which version of myself to bring into that house. I was 29. I was tired in a way I didn't have words for yet. My sister-in-law, my husband's older sister, had never liked me. I want to be fair about that. I don't think she's a monster. I think she had a version of her brother's future already written in her head long before I appeared, and I didn't fit the casting. She wanted someone from the same town, same church, same circle of people who'd known each other since elementary school. I was from 2 states over. I'd met my husband at a conference. I liked my career and I talked about it sometimes, and apparently that was a problem. She had a way of making her feelings known without ever saying them directly. A comment about how I'd styled my hair that technically counted as a compliment. A question about whether I was sure I wanted the full portion at dinner, framed as concern. Little things that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. My husband noticed some of it. He'd squeeze my hand under the table. I appreciated that more than he knew. But I had learned to manage it. Show up, be pleasant, leave with your dignity. That was my formula. What I didn't know, walking into Hargrove's that Saturday evening, was that she had been planning something for weeks. I found out later she'd been telling his parents, carefully, gradually, over phone calls I wasn't part of, that I had a spending problem, that I was running up debt our household couldn't sustain, that she was worried about her brother's financial future. She hadn't invented this from nothing. She had taken something real, something private, something my husband and I had already handled together, and she had twisted it into a story that made me sound reckless and dishonest. What actually happened was this. 8 months earlier, I'd had a rough quarter at work. I'm in sales. Commission-based. It happens. During that stretch, I leaned harder on my personal credit card than I should have. Not dramatically. I wasn't buying designer bags or booking trips, groceries, car maintenance, a vet bill for our dog that I hadn't seen coming. By the time I caught up, I'd carried about $4,000 in balance for a few months. I told my husband, we talked about it, we made a plan, we paid it off. That was the entire story. She had found out about the credit card. I still don't know exactly how, whether my husband mentioned it to someone or whether she'd seen something she shouldn't have, and she had built a narrative around it that bore almost no resemblance to what had actually happened. In her version, I was hiding money problems from my husband. In her version, I was a liability. I didn't know any of this at the start of that dinner. I remember the restaurant smelled like garlic and wood smoke. His mother was already seated when we arrived, wearing the pearl earrings she saved for occasions like this. His father stood to hug me, which he always did, which I always appreciated. My sister-in-law was at the far end of the table, talking to her husband, and she caught my eye when I walked in and gave me that smile. I should have known then. I didn't. We ordered drinks. His mother asked about my job and I told her it had been a strong quarter, which it had been. I'd just closed the best months of my year. I was genuinely proud of it. I remember thinking as I said it that I hoped it landed well, that maybe it would soften something, prove something, though I couldn't have articulated what. My sister-in-law set down her water glass. "That's great," she said. "You must be relieved, after the year you had." The table kept moving. Someone laughed at something else. I heard her words land somewhere in my chest, and I held them there, trying to understand what she meant, telling myself she might mean nothing at all. But she wasn't done. It happened slowly, the way these things do when someone has rehearsed it. A comment here about how hard it must be to manage finances on a variable income. A sympathetic look at my husband. a remark addressed to no one in particular about how she was glad they'd all talked recently and that she felt better knowing he had people looking out for him. I watched my mother-in-law's face shift, just slightly, the way you look at someone when you're recalculating. I kept eating. I kept my hands steady. I had spent 3 years learning not to react at this table, and every one of those years was the only reason I didn't say something right then that I couldn't take back. What I did instead was think. I thought about the timeline. I thought about what she could know and what she was inventing and where the two things overlapped. I thought about my husband, seated next to me, who had gone quiet in a way that meant he was doing the same math I was. I thought about what proof I had and where it was, and whether I could get to it before the dinner ended. I had something. 3 weeks earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, I had pulled together a financial summary for a loan pre-approval we were working on for a house. It was thorough. It showed our joint account balances, our individual credit scores, our debt-to-income ratio, our savings timeline. It showed clearly that we had no outstanding debt, that my credit score had recovered fully, and that our household finances were in better shape than they'd been since we'd gotten married. My mortgage broker had emailed it to me as a PDF summary. It was sitting in my inbox. I had my phone in my bag. I spent 20 minutes not touching it. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I was deciding something. If I pulled it out and put it on the table, this became a confrontation, a scene, and I had to be honest with myself about what I wanted. Did I want to embarrass her, or did I want his parents to know the truth? Those aren't always the same thing, but that night they were. The moment came when my father-in-law looked at me, genuinely, not unkindly, and said, "We just want to make sure everything is okay with the two of you." He meant finances. It was clear he meant finances. I nodded once. I reached into my bag. I pulled out my phone, opened the email from my mortgage broker, and I placed it face up on the tablecloth in front of him. "Everything is okay," I said, "but I think there's been some confusion about what actually happened last year, and I'd like to clear it up." The table went quiet. I talked for maybe 3 minutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at my sister-in-law while I was speaking, which took more effort than I want to admit. I explained the credit card, the timeline, the payoff, the current status. I pointed to the numbers on the screen. I told them my husband and I had handled it together, as a team, and that there had been nothing hidden, nothing reckless, nothing that should have made its way to this table without my knowledge. Then I did look at her. "I'm not sure what you heard or what you thought you were helping with," I said, "but I'd have appreciated being part of that conversation." She opened her mouth. She closed it. The smile was gone. Her husband, to his credit, looked at the tablecloth. My mother-in-law pressed her lips together in a way I'd never seen before. She looked at the phone. She looked at her daughter. She said, very quietly, "That was unnecessary, sweetheart." She wasn't talking to me. We finished dinner. We were polite about it. That particular kind of polite sits on top of something unresolved, the way a tablecloth hides the scratches on a table that's been through too much. In the car on the way home, my husband drove for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "I should have caught that sooner, the calls, what she was doing." "Yes," I said, "you should have." That was the hardest conversation we've had in our marriage. Not because we were angry at each other, though there was some of that, but because we had to look directly at something we'd both been managing separately instead of together. The way I'd been absorbing the small things, the way he'd learned to smooth over rather than address, the way I had felt, for 3 years, like a guest in a family I was supposed to belong to. It took a few weeks before his mother called me, not to apologize exactly. I'm not sure that word exists in the vocabulary she was raised with, but to say that she understood she might have had an incomplete picture and that she hoped we could move forward. I told her I appreciated that. I meant it. My sister-in-law and I haven't talked about that dinner. I don't know if we ever will. We see each other at holidays. We are civil. I stopped trying to make her like me somewhere around the time I placed that phone on the table, and it turns out that's a surprisingly comfortable place to stand. What I know now is this. The moment I stopped bracing for her next move and started documenting my own truth. Not for her. Not to win anything, but just because the truth deserved to exist somewhere in a concrete, undeniable form. Everything shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But the weight I'd been carrying quietly for 3 years started to lift. I am still in that family. I am still married to someone I love. I still go to Hargroves every year for the anniversary dinner, in the back room with the white tablecloths and the real candles. But I am not a guest in it anymore. And I knew that for the first time on the drive home that night, with the phone still in my bag and my husband's hand on the gear shift and the dark road ahead of us, full of things we still needed to say. There's something I've been sitting with since that dinner at Hargroves. Not the anger, that faded faster than I expected. What stayed was a quieter question. How long had I been making myself smaller to keep the peace, and when exactly did I decide that was acceptable? My sister-in-law didn't create my silence. I did. For 3 years I absorbed the small cuts and told myself it was the mature thing to do. The graceful thing, the thing a good wife does when she wants to keep her husband's family intact. What I understand now is that I confused graciousness with erasure. Those are not the same thing. Graciousness means you choose your battles with intention. Erasure means you stop believing your truth deserves to exist in the room. What she did, building that narrative quietly over weeks, through phone calls I wasn't part of, was a deliberate act. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make it easier to process. She took something true, something my husband and I had already moved through together, and she shaped it into a version that made me look dishonest. That took planning. That took a specific kind of coldness. And I think for a long time, I didn't let myself name it clearly, because naming it meant I had to decide what to do with it. The mortgage document in my bag was not an accident. I had pulled it together weeks earlier for a completely different reason, and I had kept it in my email without thinking much about it. But when I sat at that table and felt the room shift, when I watched my mother-in-law's face change, I understood that I had something solid, something real, and that I had a choice about whether to use it. That choice was the whole thing. Not the confrontation itself, the decision, made quietly, to stop deferring to a version of events that wasn't true. That's what I want to carry forward from that night. Not the satisfaction of watching her go quiet, though I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing, but the clarity of knowing that I had done the work ahead of time. I had the record. I had the numbers. I had kept my own house in order even when no one was looking, and that mattered when it counted. There's a kind of integrity in that, not performed for anyone, just real. The harder piece was the conversation with my husband on the drive home, because that required something different from me, not documentation, not composure, but honesty about what I had been carrying alone for 3 years and why I hadn't asked him to carry it with me. That was the part that asked the most of me. To say clearly that I had needed more from him and that I had never said so. That took more courage than anything I'd done at the table. I think about the version of myself who walked into that restaurant thinking she just had to survive the evening. I don't feel sorry for her exactly. I understand why she thought that was the only option, but I'm glad she reached into her bag. I'm glad she put the phone down in front of everyone. Not to win, not to humiliate, just to say, this is what's real and I'm not going to sit quietly while something false takes its place. That's the only way forward, I know. Keep your own record. Tell the truth when it matters. And stop mistaking silence for strength when all it's really doing is making you disappear.